You're watching World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Tian Wei. Still to come on our program, a diplomatic row over the idea of an unsolicited sale of Greenland. Why the fuss over the world's biggest island, the territory of a country? That's up for discussion right after this break. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing. The U.S. President Donald Trump on Tuesday announced postponing a scheduled visit to Denmark in early September. Earlier, he even expressed the interest in buying Greenland, something Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen found ridiculous. Mr. President from the United States called the moment nasty and also the comment nasty. Ms. Frederiksen said she was both sorry and surprised by the U.S. President's decision, but insisted the U.S. Danish ties remained strong. Take a look.
After President Trump floated the idea he wanted to buy Greenland for the U.S., the Danish Prime Minister called it absurd. It's a sentiment similar to that of Greenland's leader, Kim Kielsen.
A discussion has, however, been raised about a potential sale of Greenland. This has clearly been rejected by Kim Kielsen, a position that I share, of course.
In response, Mr. Trump abruptly postponed a state visit to Denmark. The former Belgian Prime Minister, who is a member of the European Parliament, Guy Verhofstadt, has mockingly proposed an exchange with Trump. But the Danish Prime Minister has sought to put an end to the sniping over Greenland. She made it clear the cancellation of Mr. Trump's state visit did not change good relations between the two countries. Mr. Trump isn't the first U.S. president interested in purchasing Greenland. In 1946, Harry S. Truman offered to buy Greenland for $100 million in gold. Greenland is the world's largest island. It's an autonomous region of Denmark with its own parliament, covering over 2 million square kilometers between the Arctic and North Atlantic Oceans. It's rich in resources and is on the direct route between the United States and Europe, so it is strategically important.
So what's behind the idea, if it is an idea, of an unsolicited U.S. purchase of Greenland from Denmark? Before we delve into it further, let's turn to our guests in Washington, D.C., Michael Sfraga, who is the director of the Wilson Center's Global Risk and Resilience Program and Polar Institute. Thank you, sir, for joining us. And also in Copenhagen, Denmark, we have Mark Jacobsen, a senior fellow and leadership program member at the Arctic Institute. Last but not least, once again, Cui Hongjian from the Institute of International Studies from China. Thank you so much, the three of you, for joining us. Go to you first. Mr. Jacobsen, based in Denmark. I heard that the Danish even joked about that Greenland is also willing to buy the United States back.
Yeah, that's true. There's been quite some jokes about buying Alaska or buying something else. So people are quite surprised, but people in Denmark also have a good humor, so they tend to see the bright side of it as well.
Well, I just wondered, Mr. Jacobsen, besides humor, what else can you do with such a proposal, right? I mean, when people think about that, of a territory of your country being proposed by the president of another country without the approval of your country to say to be purchased, what do people make of it?
Well, they kind of, it is a respect of Danish sovereignty, no doubt about that. The big issue is that it seems like Donald Trump has not understood the relationship between Denmark and Greenland, because first of all, such a proposal should be made to Nuuk, the capital of Greenland, and not to Copenhagen, because Greenland has self-government, and they have had self-government for 10 years.
Yes.
So also clearly stated by the Prime Minister, well, this is not an issue that should be addressed to her, but rather to Kim Kielsen.
Mr. Frega, your president talked in a very interesting way that is known worldwide. But this time, a state trip has been scrapped off as a result of apparently the other country or the other place unwilling to sell itself to the United States. What does that say about the nature of relationship between the two countries, even though the Danish are trying to say, oh, it's not going to hurt the bilateral relations?
Well, it's
true that
Denmark and Greenland
Mr. Frega, if we can. Mr. Frega, please.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
Sure, that's okay. Thank you. Well, I will say that, institutionally, country to country, I think there's a very strong relationship between the United States and the Kingdom of Denmark, and the United States and Greenland, and the government of Greenland. So I'm not too concerned institutionally, both historically but going forward, about this relationship being solid. What you see here is a transactional narrative from the President. In the United States, there's a phrase when it comes to selling real estate. It's all about location, location, location. Greenland certainly has a strategic location. You also see the personality of the President. He deals on a personal basis and a transactional basis most of the time, versus a political basis for his decision-making and his tweets and his narrative. So I'm concerned that it has rippled the effect of the relationship, but I'm not concerned that this relationship will be damaged in the long run.
But, Mr. Frega, I was a Washington correspondent when your president was George W. Bush. Of course, it was also turbulent years with the war, but even though he was in the oil business, he didn't talk about buying other countries or territories of other countries either. I mean, he's a business person at the very beginning also. So it really, many wonder, shows the nature of arrogance, some say, about international governance coming from the capital of Washington, even though it's about one unique personality in the White House. But people look at it on a much bigger scale. Mr. Frega, do you think this will have a bigger impact than just a joke, a political joke through a tweet? That's what people really wonders.
Well, I think it certainly chills the environment globally to have a president of the United States talk about purchasing unsolicited real estate from another government. It just simply doesn't happen every day. In fact, it doesn't happen. So I'm, again, not too concerned about the relationship between the Kingdom, Greenland, and the United States.
I see.
But it certainly has rippled around the globe, because it is not the way diplomacy is conducted. It is not the narrative that one world leader provides to the rest of the world. They look to the United States for leadership, but it simply is not the way things need to be done, should be done. And I think any other country would simply look at this discussion and this offer rather in an interesting light. And I don't think it sheds a good light on the United States, and it does nothing to reinforce our partnerships around the globe.
Having said that, though, let's focus also on Greenland, which is an island with a lot of world attention. Mr. Jacobson, I want to go to you about that as an important location between the Arctic and the Atlantic. What do you see as the geopolitical as well as the security importance and significance of Greenland? Once it is being put into such a spotlight, what does it mean to this place?
Well, when you sit in the Oval Office in D.C., in Washington, D.C., and you look at Russia, the shortest way to hit with a missile in Russia is via the Arctic, the North Pole. So, as the recent U.S. Defense Arctic Strategy stated, the Arctic is seen as a potential avenue for competition and great power aggression. So it's in that light that Greenland should be seen as a geostrategic, very, very important place. So during the Cold War, it was immensely important, and they built the Thule Air Base. Then the following 20, 30 years after the Cold War, it hasn't been that important anymore. But now, instead with Russia's military build-up in the Arctic, especially on Franz Josef Land in the Arctic Ocean close to Greenland, the Thule Air Base has become very important again. So Russia is one thing, then China is another thing, as we saw with Mike Pompeo in Finland Arctic Council, where he warned against that the Arctic Ocean could become another South China Sea, where there's a fight over territorial claims. So it should be seen in a high politics perspective. It's not just something about the Arctic. It's a high politics security perspective. Because if anything happens in Greenland militarily, it is seen as a threat to U.S. national security, because Greenland is part of the North American continent and therefore also part of the Monroe Doctrine.
That really put Denmark and Greenland certainly in a very difficult situation, because they don't want to stand in any so-called one line or the other in geopolitics, right, Mr. Cui? So when China's name is being mentioned, I have to go to you about that. There are exploration of the Arctic by several countries, particularly recently, U.S., Russia, China, and some of the European countries. Now, what is China, when looking at Greenland and the Arctic, thinking? And how is China going to work with the others, but not being suspicious by the others when acting in the Arctic and working on projects in the area? Mr. Cui.
Frankly, I think from China's perspective, China also tried to keep a kind of active and also cautious attitude towards this Arctic issue.
I see.
As we know now, China become the observer country in the Arctic Council recently.
That's right.
But of course, China also issued its first policy paper last year to focus on some priority in Arctic from China, including scientific cooperation and also some more environment protection, anything. But now the question, I think, from China for China and for some other, especially Arctic country, is maybe potential military competition, just like our Danish guest mentioned. I think that now this issue between Denmark and the United States, it looks like just a diplomatic issue, but now we can find out a more or deeper, reason behind it, because now why President Trump showed a lot of interest.
Of course, we all understand
Greenland
that. That's our
is some geostrategic consideration, because as we understand, 63 years ago, his predecessor, President Truman, tried to do the same thing, and also the last year, the United States delivered its aircraft carrier to the Arctic region in the last 27 years.
Right.
And it happened to, very interesting thing is this aircraft carrier is the same name, Harry Truman.
It's
So
interesting.
I think that the issue now is if China and some other stakeholders for the Arctic cooperation, we need to keep some, more cautious about any potential of this aggressive attitude from the United States.
Let me go to Mr. Svaga, just to be fair in this discussion. Now, are we going to revisit everything that we did during the Cold War now, including about Greenland? That's a question. It's a very legitimate question. Do we have to repeat everything we did before? All the stupid things once again? Yesterday once more? Mr. Svaga?
Well, I hope not. I don't think we need to. I think we need to be very cautious about the Arctic. We have a new ocean opening before our very eyes. We have governance structures in place. So to go back and revisit a Cold War scenario is not in the world's best interest. And as this new ocean opens, it's testing our institutions, it's testing our way of thinking, and Greenland becomes an exemplary effort, an example of the way in which the Arctic is unfolding before our very eyes. Rapidly and palpably, the climate has changed the Arctic. And so if we refer back to Cold War narratives and Cold War stances, I do not think we justify our positions, and I don't think we serve the world well. I think we need to look at this through a different lens. The fact that you have a great power competition, as some have said, between the United States, China, and Russia, calls for even more dialogue between the three nations. It includes consultation with the government of Greenland. It calls for increased narrative, not less narrative. It calls for more visits, more state visits, not less state visits. I think the more engagement in the Arctic, which we have seen over the last 2 decades, needs to overshadow any mention, any design, any efforts for another Cold War stance.
Of course, climate change is a very difficult issue for Washington right now because of party politics and the election. Now, Mr. Svaga, do you think there's any way when that terminology is not used, but actions related to it can be taken by either the 3 countries we just mentioned and together with those countries in the Arctic Circle, be able to have a possibility in the near future? Mr. Svaga, what do you think?
Well, I see no other way forward but with a sense of urgency. You're right. The words climate change in Washington, D.C. here are rather charged words. But the fact is climate change is real. And in the Arctic it's rapid, and we're seeing palpable changes. So we must work with China and Russia and the rest of the nations that have signed on to COP. To walk away from the Paris Treaty, I think, is an ignorant stance for the United States. I think we need to be at the table and come up with solution sets that are before us. We have the technologies. We understand what we need to do. We need to have the political will to move forward together with Arctic and non-Arctic nations to solve something much bigger than the Arctic. We're talking about the sustainability of our planet.
Exactly.
If you're asking me, does Washington, D.C. have the political will right now? Right now, under this administration, it does not seem that we have the political will to address climate change head-on for not our generation, but the generations ahead of us.
I see. Mr. Jacobson, before we go, I do want to invite your opinion. After all, you are living the closest to the Greenland, as we mentioned, and also people of Denmark are certainly have a huge love for the nature and the big, strong supporter of climate change issues. What do you think? Is there some immediate thing that can be done, at least together?
I'm not sure I got the whole question, but I heard at least the word climate change and that the Danish people are very much aware about the environment. And yes, I agree 100%, and that's another issue where the Danish government and the Trump administration do not agree. And also it kind of splits the Arctic Council, as we saw in Finland as well. So I very much agree with Fraga that the climate change should be #1. That's the #1 threat in the Arctic and beyond. And the way to solve this is to do it together. No doubt about that. And as she said as well, that the solution should be more state visits, not less state visits. And I think actually what the Trump administration did some time prior to the idea of purchasing Greenland, about announcing establishing a permanent U.S. representation in Nuuk, that's the way to go. So to have more communication, more interstate relations, but also between the U.S. and Greenland directly. That's the way. Communication, communication, not location, location.
Well, hopefully it's the communication for the good nature. Thank you so much, Mark Jacobson, Michael Svaga, last but not least, Cui Hongjian. Really appreciate it, gentlemen. Thank you. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight, CGTN, into your search engine. Check out our YouTube channel. Also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for more insights across China and around the world. Good night.